The war room fell silent when Commander Elias Thorne walked in with a Veloxy clinging to his shoulder. Not because the Veloxy were rare, they weren't. The insectoid species had been Earth's reluctant allies for 3 years now, ever since the Keth Dominion had started consuming worlds in the Outer Rim. But this particular Veloxy was small, juvenile, and she was wrapped around the most decorated tactical saboteur in the Coalition fleet like she belonged there. "Commander," Admiral Chen said slowly, her eyes fixed on the creature's iridescent wings, "care to explain why you've brought a child into a classified briefing?" "She's not a child, Admiral." Thorne's voice was flat, tired. The kind of tired that came from 17 years of dismantling enemy ships from the inside while everyone you entered with didn't make it out. "She's my assigned companion, courtesy of the Veloxy High Council." The room erupted. "A companion program? With humans? Since when do the Veloxy? Is this some kind of diplomatic?" The small Veloxy shifted on Thorne's shoulder, her compound eyes catching the overhead lights and fracturing them into 1,000 tiny stars. She said nothing, just watched. "Enough." Admiral Chen raised her hand. "Commander, my office. Now." The walk through the corridor was silent, except for the soft clicking of the Veloxy's clawed feet, adjusting her grip on Thorne's tactical vest. He hadn't asked for her name. Hadn't asked for anything. When the Veloxy delegation had presented her to him after the Battle of Nexus 7, a gift for the human who saved our hive ship, he'd simply nodded and walked away. "That was 6 hours ago. You need to send her back," Thorne said the moment Chen's door closed behind them. "I can't." Chen moved to her desk, pulling up a holographic display. "The Veloxy High Council specifically requested this. They've never offered the companion bond to a non-Veloxy before. Refusing would be a diplomatic catastrophe. Then find someone else. I'm not a babysitter." "You're not being asked to babysit." Chen's eyes were sharp. "You're being asked to accept an honor that 6 other species have been denied for centuries. The Veloxy don't bond lightly, Commander. They don't bond at all outside their own kind. Until now." The small Veloxy, still unnamed, still silent, shifted again. One of her 4 hands reached out and touched the scar that ran along Thorne's jaw. He flinched. "Don't," he said. She pulled back immediately. But her eyes never left his face. "Her name is Kiravel," Chen said quietly. "She's young by Veloxy standards, roughly equivalent to our late teens. She specifically requested you. She doesn't know me. She knows what you did at Nexus 7. You breached the Keth flagship alone, disabled their targeting array, and gave our fleet the 17 seconds we needed to evacuate the hive ship. 4,000 Veloxy survived because of you." Chen paused. Her entire family was on that ship. Thorne said nothing. His hand moved unconsciously to his side, where the plasma burns from Nexus 7 were still healing beneath his uniform. "The companion bond isn't what you think it is," Chen continued. "It's not servitude. It's not ownership. I've been reading the cultural briefs. It's more like a mutual witnessing. They believe that certain souls are meant to walk the same path. She believes her path is with you. Her path is going to get her killed." Thorne's voice was hard. "I go into places where people don't come back. That's my job. That's what I do." For the first time, Kiravel spoke. Her voice was soft, layered with harmonic undertones that humans could barely perceive. "You go into places where people don't come back," she repeated. "And yet, you always do." Thorne turned to look at her properly for the first time. She was small, barely reaching his shoulder even perched as she was. Her exoskeleton was a deep blue-green, not yet hardened to the darker shades of adult Veloxy. Her wings were folded tight against her back, still soft at the edges. She was terrifyingly young. "That's not skill," he said. "That's luck. And luck runs out. Then I will be there when it does." Her compound eyes held his gaze without wavering. "That is what witnessing means." Thorne looked at Admiral Chen. "This is insane. This is diplomacy." Chen sat back. "You have 48 hours before your next deployment. I suggest you use that time to reach some kind of understanding with your new partner." Dismissed. The word partner hung in the air long after they left the office. The training simulation was supposed to be simple. Infiltrate a mock-up of a Keth destroyer, disable the primary weapons array, extract before the security protocols lock down. Thorne had run variations of this scenario 100 times. He could do it in his sleep. What he couldn't do was stop worrying about the small Veloxy following 3 steps behind him. "You're too close," he hissed, pressing his back against a corridor wall as the simulated patrol droids passed overhead. If this were real, their heat sensors would have picked you up by now. Veloxy body temperature is 4.7 degrees lower than human baseline. Kiravel replied calmly. "Their sensors are calibrated for mammalian signatures. I would not register." Thorne blinked. "How do you know their sensor calibrations?" "I studied them. Before I requested you as my companion path." She moved past him, her smaller body sliding through a gap in the corridor infrastructure that he would have had to blast through. I studied everything about the missions you undertake. If I am to witness your path, I must understand it. She emerged on the other side and began working on an access panel, her 4 hands moving with surprising precision. This junction connects to the secondary power grid. If you disable the primary array through the main access point, there will be a 2.3-second window before backup power engages. Not enough time to reach extraction. Thorne squeezed through the gap after her, his tactical mind already reassessing. But if we hit the secondary grid first, the window extends to 7.8 seconds. Sufficient for standard extraction protocol. He stared at her. In 17 years of solo operations, no one had ever improved his infiltration plans. Not because they couldn't, but because he never let anyone close enough to try. You've been running simulations, he said slowly. 47 times. Her hands paused on the panel. I wish to be useful, not a burden. Something shifted in Thorne's chest. Something he'd thought he'd burned out years ago. Show me the secondary grid access, he said. The rest of the simulation went differently than any he'd run before. Kiravel didn't fight. Her body wasn't built for it, not yet, maybe not ever. But she moved through spaces he couldn't reach, accessed systems he couldn't interface with, and saw patterns in the enemy's security that his human eyes missed. When they reached the weapons array, Thorne found himself hesitating. What is wrong? Kiravel asked, perched on a conduit above him. Nothing, just... He shook his head. I'm used to doing this part alone, the part where things go wrong. Things will still go wrong, she said. But now there will be 2 of us to witness it. He almost smiled. That's supposed to be comforting? Among my people, it is the greatest comfort there is. She dropped down beside him, her wings brushing against his arm. No one should face the dark alone. That is the first teaching of the companion bond. Thorne disabled the weapons array. The simulation registered a successful mission. Later, in the debriefing room, Admiral Chen reviewed the footage with an expression Thorne couldn't read. Your completion time improved by 23%, she said. Collateral damage reduced by 40%, dodge die. And you used an access route that our tactical AI hadn't even identified. That was Kiravel. I know. Chen looked up at him. She's not what I expected. Thorne glanced at the small Veloxi, who was examining a holographic display of the destroyer's layout with intense concentration. She'd been quiet since the simulation ended, but her hands hadn't stopped moving, tracing routes, marking vulnerabilities, building something in her mind that he couldn't see. No, he admitted. She's not. That night, Thorne found Kiravel in the observation deck, her compound eyes fixed on the stars beyond the station's viewport. You should be sleeping, he said, settling into a chair nearby. Not next to her, but closer than he would have yesterday. Veloxi do not sleep as humans do. We enter a state of passive awareness. I can do so while watching. She didn't turn from the window. The stars look different from here. Less crowded than from the hive ship. Do you miss it? You're home? For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, I miss the sound of my family sleeping around me. The warmth of bodies in the communal chamber. Her wings rustled softly. But the hive ship was never truly home. We were refugees before I was born. The Keth destroyed our world when I was still in the egg. Thorne's hands tightened on the armrests. I didn't know that. There is much we do not know about each other. She finally turned to look at him. That is why witnessing takes time. Seasons. Sometimes generations. A companion bond is not formed in days. It is grown. Like the crystals in the deep caves of our lost world. And if one of us dies before it's grown, then the other carries the memory forward. Every moment witnessed is a moment preserved. Her voice dropped, harmonics deepening. When you entered the Keth flagship at Nexus 7, my mother was watching from the hive ship's bridge. She saw you breach the hull. She saw you disappear inside. And she saw, 17 seconds later, the targeting array go dark. Thorne remembered those 17 seconds. The burns. The close calls. The certainty that he wasn't going to make it out. She told me, Kiravel continued, that in those 17 seconds, she witnessed something she had never seen before. A human, alone, choosing to die so that strangers could live. She said it was the most beautiful and terrible thing she had ever witnessed. I didn't die. No, Dot. You didn't. Kiravel's eyes caught the starlight. And when the council asked who should receive the first companion bond, offered to a non-Veloxi, my mother gave them my name. Because she believed that anyone who could walk into certain death and walk out again deserved to never walk alone. Thorne sat in silence for a long time, watching the stars with her. I'm not a good person to witness, he finally said. I've done things, seen things that no one should carry. That, Kiravel said quietly, is precisely why you need someone to carry them with you. The mission was supposed to be reconnaissance. A Keth supply station on the edge of contested space, believed to be lightly defended. Get in, map the facility, identify weaknesses for a future assault. No direct engagement. It went wrong within 30 seconds of breaching the hull. Keth Warcast, Thorne breathed, pressing Kiravel behind him as the massive armored figures emerged from the shadows. At least 20. This isn't a supply station. It's a trap. They knew we were coming. Kiravel's voice was steady, but he could feel her hearts racing through the thin exoskeleton pressed against his back. How? Doesn't matter now. He was already calculating angles, distances, probabilities. All of them bad. We need to reach extraction. The shuttle's 3 corridors back, but they'll be covering. There. Kiravel pointed with one of her upper hands, maintenance shaft eye. They are too large to follow. Thorne looked. The shaft was narrow, too narrow for him, but Kiravel could make it. Go, he said. Get to the shuttle. I'll draw them off. No, that wasn't a request. He grabbed her by the shoulder, forcing her toward the shaft. Your body is smaller, your heat signature is lower. You can make it. I can't. I will not leave you. Her claws dug into his tactical vest with surprising strength. That is not what witnessing means. Then you're going to witness me die, because I can't. The first plasma bolt screamed past his head. What followed was chaos. Thorne moved on instinct, 17 years of combat training taking over, while his conscious mind went somewhere far away. He knew, with cold certainty, that he wasn't going to make it to extraction. The numbers were too bad. The Keth were too many. But every second he bought was a second for Kiravel to escape. Except, she didn't escape. She stayed at his side, her smaller body ducking and weaving through spaces the Keth couldn't reach. She wasn't fighting, but she was disrupting. Pulling cables that dimmed lights. Opening doors that redirected enemies. Creating momentary confusion that gave Thorne the split seconds he needed to keep moving. And then they reached the reactor room, and the doors sealed behind them. Override, Thorne panted, slumping against the wall. His left arm wasn't working right. Plasma burn probably, though he couldn't feel the pain yet. Can you? Already trying. Kiravel was at the control panel, her 4 hands a blur. The system is locked. They have isolated this section. Through the reinforced viewport, Thorne could see the shuttle. 50 meters of open deck between them and freedom. 50 meters they couldn't cross. There. He pointed at the reactor itself, a massive crystalline structure humming with power. If I overload the core, it'll blow the outer hull. Create a breach we can use to reach the shuttle. The explosion will be too fast. You will not survive. That's not. He stopped. Looked at her. Kiravel was already moving toward the reactor, her small body navigating the safety barriers with ease. The manual overload requires simultaneous activation of 4 control nodes, she said. You cannot reach them all. But I can. No. The shuttle AI will pilot you to safety once the breach is created. You must simply reach it. Her voice was calm, too calm. My path was always to witness yours. I did not expect it to be so short, but I said no. Thorne grabbed her, pulling her away from the reactor. His burned arms screamed in protest, but he didn't care. That's not how this works. You don't die for me. I'm not dying for you. She looked up at him, compound eyes catching the reactor's glow. I am completing my witnessing. Every moment with you has been a gift I did not expect to receive. If this is where my path ends, then I end it having witnessed something beautiful. There's nothing beautiful about this. About any of this. No. She reached up with one small hand and touched the scar on his jaw, the same scar she touched on the first day when he'd flinched away. This time, he didn't move. You spent 17 years walking into the dark so that others would not have to. You have carried more grief than any soul should bear. And still you fight. Still, you protect. Still, you refuse to let the universe take those you care for. Her harmonics deepened, filling the reactor room with resonances that vibrated in his chest. That is beautiful, Elias Thorne. That is worth witnessing. That is worth dying for. Thorne looked at this small, fierce creature who had attached herself to him less than a week ago, who had studied his missions, improved his strategies, followed him into a trap that might kill them both. Who was ready to die so that he could live? He thought about the 17 seconds at Nexus 7. About all the times he'd walked into certain death alone, not because he was brave, but because there was no one left to miss him. There's another way, he said slowly. What? The reactor? Instead of overloading it, we can redirect the magnetic containment. He was thinking out loud now, plans forming faster than he could speak them. Create a focused breach, small, controlled, just enough to punch through the hull without taking us with it. The containment systems require continuous calibration. It would take both of us working simultaneously. Yes. He looked at her. Both of us. Together. Hi. Kiravel was silent for a long moment. Then her wings rustled, and something like warmth flickered across her alien features. Together, she repeated. They worked in tandem, human and Veloxi, hands moving across controls that should have been impossible to coordinate. The Keth were pounding on the doors. The reactor was screaming with barely contained energy. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. The breach blew outward, taking a section of hull with it but leaving them alive. Thorne grabbed Kiravel, tucking her small body against his chest, and jumped. The medbay lights were too bright. Thorne had been awake for 6 hours, but he hadn't moved from the bed. Partly because the doctors had threatened to sedate him, if he tried. Partly because Kiravel was asleep on his chest, her small body curled into a tight spiral, and he didn't want to wake her. She'd been in worse shape than he was, despite his protests. The decompression had been hard on her softer exoskeleton, and the cold of space had sent her into a dangerous torpor before the shuttle's heating systems could compensate. For 3 hours after their rescue, the doctors hadn't been sure she would wake up. She'd woken up demanding to know if he was all right. You should sleep in a proper bed, he said softly, knowing she was probably still in her passive awareness state and could hear him. This can't be comfortable. It is warm, she murmured, not opening her eyes. And I can hear your heart. Both of them, the biological one and the mechanical assist. You can hear my pacemaker? Veloxi hearing extends into subsonic ranges. Her wings shifted slightly. You've had it for many years. The rhythm is familiar. Comforting. Thorne wasn't sure what to say to that. He settled for resting one hand carefully on her back, between her folded wings. The mission debrief, he said. Chen's going to want... Admiral Chen visited while you were sedated. She said the debrief could wait until we were both recovered. Kiravel finally opened her eyes, compound lenses catching the light. She also said that the reconnaissance data I transmitted during our escape will be valuable. The Keth station was not what it appeared. It was a staging ground for an assault on the third hive ship. You transmitted data? When? While you were fighting. My upper hands were free. She tilted her head. I did not mention it because there were more pressing concerns. Thorne stared at her. Then, for the first time in years, he laughed. It came out rusty, unpracticed, but real. You saved an entire hive ship's worth of intelligence while we were running for our lives. I saved nothing. I transmitted. Others will act on the information. But there was something that might have been pride in her harmonics. It seemed efficient. Efficient. He shook his head. You're going to be a better operative than I ever was. I do not wish to be an operative. She shifted, rearranging herself so she could look at him properly. I wish to be your companion. There's a difference. The word hung in the air between them. Companion. In Veloxi culture, it meant something profound. Something permanent. When you talked about witnessing, Thorne said slowly, about carrying memories forward, is that all it is? Observation? No. Kiravel's voice was soft. Witnessing is not passive. It is active engagement. It means seeing someone truly, understanding them completely, and choosing to walk beside them anyway. Her claws flexed gently against his chest. Many Veloxi witness for their entire lives and never reach true understanding. The bond is rare. Precious. It cannot be forced or manufactured. And you think we have that? After less than a week, I think, she said carefully, that when you grabbed me in the reactor room, you chose my life over your mission, over your own survival instinct, over 17 years of training that taught you to sacrifice anything for the objective. Her eyes found his. In that moment, I felt something I had never felt before. Not observation. Not duty. Something deeper. Thorne remembered the moment. The certainty that had flooded through him when he pulled her away from the reactor controls. The absolute knowledge that he could not, would not, let her die. It hadn't felt like choice. It had felt like instinct. On Nexus 7, he said quietly, I disabled the entire targeting array. Every missile, every tracking system, everything. That was the mission. Complete destruction of offensive capability, I know. My mother watched. But if I'd only disabled part of it, one missile system, one targeting node, I would have had more time. Better odds of escape. The array would still have been crippled enough for the evacuation to succeed. He met her eyes. I did it anyway. All of it. Because I thought I was going to die no matter what, and I wanted to make sure. Kiravel was silent, waiting. In that reactor room, I thought about the same thing. About how many ways I could sacrifice you to improve my chances, how many calculations I could make to justify it. His voice dropped. And I couldn't do any of them. Not one. Because somewhere between the training simulation and that moment, you stopped being a variable. You started being... He stopped. The word wouldn't come. The bond, Kiravel said softly. You feel it too. I feel something. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the same thing you feel. He closed his eyes. I've been alone for a very long time. I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else. You do not have to remember. Her small hand touched his face, tracing the scar along his jaw. You only have to allow it to happen. The doors opened. Admiral Chen walked in, her expression carefully neutral. Commander, Kiravel, ... She nodded to both of them. I've just finished reviewing the combat footage from the station. Thorne tried to sit up, but Kiravel's weight on his chest made it difficult. Admiral, stay down, that's an order. Chen pulled up a holographic display. The footage is interesting. Particularly the part where you abandoned a tactically sound escape route to return for a companion you've known for less than a week. I made a judgment call. You made an emotional call. Chen's eyes flickered to Kiravel. Which, according to everything I know about you, should be impossible. You've been operating alone for 17 years specifically because emotional attachments compromise your effectiveness. With respect, Admiral, but the mission data Kiravel transmitted has already saved lives. The hive ship began evacuation procedures an hour ago, based on her intelligence. The Keth assault force will arrive to find an empty target. Chen's expression shifted, softening almost imperceptibly. So perhaps emotional calls aren't always compromising. Kiravel's harmonics hummed with what Thorne had learned to recognize as surprise. The hive ship is evacuating? Safely, thanks to you. Chen turned back to Thorne. The Veloxi High Council has requested a formal meeting. They want to discuss expanding the companion bond program to other human operatives. It seems your partnership has been deemed a success. It's been a week, Thorne said. And in that week, you've improved mission outcomes by over 20%, saved an entire hive ship's population, and demonstrated that human Veloxi bonds can function under combat conditions. Chen's mouth twitched. I call that a success. After she left, Thorne and Kiravel were quiet for a long time. A success, Kiravel finally said. That is what we are. That's what the metrics say. And what do you say? Thorne thought about the moment in the reactor room. The moment when all his calculations had failed and something older, deeper, had taken over. The moment when he'd realized that the small Veloxi on his shoulder had become something he couldn't quantify. I disabled one missile instead of all, he said slowly. At Nexus 7, I mean. In my head, I ran the numbers, and I knew that partial destruction would be enough. That I could save time. Save myself. But you disabled all of them. Because I was alone. He looked at her, really looked. Because there was no one waiting for me to come back, no reason to survive beyond the mission, so I gave everything to the mission. Kiravel's compound eyes held depths he was still learning to read. And now. He reached up and touched her face, tracing the delicate ridges of her exoskeleton. Now I think I would disable one missile, instead of all. Because now there's someone waiting for me to come back. Her harmonics resonated through both of them, a sound like starlight and certainty. That, she said, is what the bond means. Not witnessing alone, but becoming worth returning for. Outside the medbay window, the stars turned slowly in the endless dark. Somewhere out there, the Keth were preparing their next assault. Somewhere, the war continued its relentless grind. But here, in this small room, something new was being born. Something that defied calculation and refused to be quantified. Thorne closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his companion against his chest, and for the first time in 17 years, he didn't feel alone. So, he said quietly, what happens now? Now. Kiravel's wings rustled softly. Now we walk the path together, however long it runs, however dark it gets, and when my luck runs out, then I will be there to witness it. Her claws tightened gently on his vest. And you will not be alone. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a contract. It was something far more terrifying, and far more precious. It was a bond. And for the first time since he'd started walking into the dark, Elias Thorne realized he finally had a reason to walk back out.